to Science in the Virtual Pub. We've got a slideshow of coming attractions. We'll actually get formally started about 5 minutes after the hour. I'm Don Haas, the host of Science in the Virtual Pub, and tonight I am coming to you from Laurel, Maryland, where I was at a session with a couple of hundred high school students today. There is a link to our um, blog post on 5 years of science in the virtual pub. And here is tonight's speaker, Ben Luce with Solar Power Now. Ben is the chair of the board of directors of the American Solar Energy Society and a solar analyst with Buffalo Solar. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have our last session of the spring with Sarah Worley talking about charismatic microflora. There is where you can donate to support us. Uh, and I also put some of that in the chat. There's a session for the fall that's we're starting to schedule the fall. That's the one we have on the calendar so far. And you can check out the programming through May on our events page. And also find recordings of most previous sessions on that page. We are live on YouTube, I'll also say, and we are the Paleontological Research Institution. And tonight we are coming to you from Ithaca, Laurel, Maryland, and Clarence, New York. You can check out the most recent issue of Learning Earth, our educator newsletter there. And I'll put a whole bunch of links in the chat as well. And you can subscribe there. Oops, I'm gonna set it to the right place. There we go. And you can check out what else is coming up on our events calendar. And as I said earlier, we'll start formally about 7:05. Hand it off to Ben then. Jeff Over is coming in. That's nice to see. Hi, Jeff. And for tonight's beer, I am having an Imperial Series Spring IPA from the now closed 12 Gates Brewery in Buffalo.
Are you rationing your beer from that closed brewery, or are you just not worrying about it?
I'm not really rationing, but I did buy a bunch at their going out of business sale.
Okay, good.
Will note it was water in here that I finished off before pouring that beer, so I'm going too deep because it is an 8% beer.
Mm.
Okay, so that's Sol is coming up in November. We'll have the uh, fall schedule posted sometime this summer. You can find what's left this season, which is just one more after tonight, 2 weeks from tonight. And you can find recordings of most previous sessions on our events page.
And I will mention that for those who are interested in music, especially electronic music, our guest this evening, Ben Luce, did a benefit concert for the Paleontological Research Institution and Museum of the Earth back in September. And, and there is a full video recording of that evening on YouTube at his band's website. So this is Sonic Vortex, and I'm going to put that link into the chat right now. I actually tried to share it with my students earlier, and I don't know what happened, but the link got messed up in the announcement I sent out, so I'm going to put it again in the chat now.
Excellent. So we'll do once more through the coming attractions, and then I'll hand it over to Ben for tonight's Earth Day session for Earth Week. And there again is our blog commemorating 5 years of Science in the Virtual Pub. Check that out. And tonight again, we have Ben Luce with Solar Power Now, and Ben is the chair of the board of directors of the American Solar Energy Society and a discovery analyst for Buffalo Solar. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have Dr. Sarah Worley talking about charismatic microflora, introducing the hidden freshwater algae all around you. There's where you can donate to Science in the Virtual Pub. And I think with that, I will stop sharing and pass it off to my old friend Ben Luce, who I have known for something like 5 decades. We went to high school together and junior high as well, way back when. And now Ben is the chair of the board of directors of the American Solar Energy Society, and he's going to talk to us about solar energy. Take it away, Ben.
Hey, everybody. So it's fantastic to be here on this show. Thank you, Don and Rob and Ingrid and everybody there at PRI. It's such a wonderful organization, and fossils and all earth science and all that stuff is still one of my personal passions, one that I've never gotten to spend enough time on. But I certainly love going down to the museum and meeting with you folks. So let's see. So tonight, I'm going to, let's see if I can get this to work right. I'm going to bring up my screen here, and we're going to talk tonight on the topic of solar power, photovoltaics. There's other forms of solar energy, but mainly we're going to talk about solar or electricity. Let me test my slides out here and see if I can move back and forth. I can. So can you all see that okay? Is it looking okay from your end, Don?
Looks good. Looks good.
All right. All right. Thank you. So, all right. So anyways, so as Don was saying, I kind of wear two hats. My title at Buffalo Solar has changed. I've expanded my role. I'm now the director of technical design, and also I'm doing advocacy and outreach now. I have an advocacy background as well as a technical background, and the company decided that we needed to get a little bit more going on the advocacy side in New York. Where we have some good, strong policies, but we have a long way to go to really making this work. I wanted to mention a little bit about ASUS. So ASUS is the oldest and largest solar energy society in the United States. We're kind of the professional society, so to speak. We're tightly tied up with the National Renewable Energy Lab, little chapters and state solar associations across the United States. And we're 70 years old this year. So ASUS is really having a kind of a big celebration, and we're happy to be around. And I think that our mission is needed as much as ever now. So what ASUS really is an advocacy group and an educational group and a networking group. We do a lot of things. One of the things we do is hold a national conference. Every other year, that's held in Boulder, so that's coming up this summer. And we also put on a national solar tour, which helps get people to actually get inside solar homes and really see how they function. We're also expanding that now to large solar systems so that people can get an up-close look at that kind of stuff. We have a magazine called Solar Today Magazine, which is a great kind of in-depth magazine that covers many, many different aspects of the field, and it's very well edited and reviewed. We have an online community. That's a great place to pose questions. If you put questions there, you'll get a plethora of answers from very well-informed people. We do various networking on projects, the Zero Emissions Network. Right now we're trying to facilitate the installation of solar systems on the Pine Ridge Reservation right now. We're having a little trouble getting our grants actually delivered. As you know, what's happening with federal grants. So that's a challenge, but we're doing the best we can. We also we support chapters and other types of things. So check out ASUS. We're very economical and cheap to join, and we can really use members and community. So professionally, these days, I was for many years, I was a physics professor, but and a physics researcher before that. But I've been involved in solar energy for 35, 40 years, and I decided to jump into the industry several years ago, and I now work at Buffalo Solar. We're a commercial solar installer. We started off as a residential. We're located in Depew, New York, where I'm talking to you right now. This is kind of what I do. So I research emerging technologies and kind of evaluate them for viability and how they might fit into our installations. I develop the proposals for our systems. So I maintain and create and maintain the software we use for that. We analyze electricity demand. We use utility bills to create models of how buildings use electricity. Then I design a system and simulate it using a program called Helioscope. Then I estimate the utility bill savings by combining all that information. Then I price out the systems with our team, which is a complicated process, especially when you consider labor and things like that. Then we assess the available incentives that are available, and we put all that together, and we compute what the cash flow will be for the customer. Then I try to create really compelling proposals, and I'm often involved with trying to persuade customers to accept them. If they do accept them, then I create the contracts out of the software. And then once the project is built, I analyze the system performance post-installation. And nowadays, I'm also back to doing policy. I'm traveling over to Albany and advocating at the state legislature there. And I am doing as much as I can on educational outreach. So events like this. Back in my earlier days, I did a lot of work. I did a lot of educational and advocacy work in New Mexico. This is me back in the early 2000s with a solar rig I used to drag all over the state. At the time, I was chair of the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, and we would do these events all over the place as a way of educating people and kind of building support. Lots of demonstration work. I look a little younger there than I am now. And one of the things I realized, and this is a major theme for tonight, is that it's very hard to get very far with just getting people interested. We really have to remove the financial barriers and the technical barriers to this. And for that, we really needed changes in policy. I got very, very involved for over a decade in New Mexico on policy efforts. This is my team from around 2006 at the New Mexico State Legislature. And that was fun. It was very challenging work. New Mexico is a very fossil fuel dominated state. We really had to go toe to toe, but we were very successful. This is Bill Richardson signing the state renewable energy standard into law, which is a law that took us 8 years to get through. And then that's me at the podium with my NREL solar tie, which I still have and use at the legislature sometimes. After New Mexico, I was in Vermont for 15 years as a physics professor, but I kept working on solar projects and doing solar education. This is a system you see in there that we installed at Linden State College. And that's Bernie Sanders there. He came and did the ribbon cutting. He helped us get the grant, which was fantastic. Solar was a lot more expensive at the time. And that's one of my students there on the right, Ryan Jean, who's now a very successful guy in the solar industry, and whom I have the joy of learning from now myself. One of the things I really want to emphasize here is let's see, I'm having a little trouble at the top here. Let me see. I'm not able to read something, so let me move this. I have to hit it. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is a strong opinion of mine that the best way to fight climate change really is to actually fix the energy system. We're just not going to get away from fossil fuels through just by simply using less electricity, especially today with the rising use of electricity. We really have to transition the system over, and that's difficult. There are a lot of barriers to doing that. We must, I believe, we must transition to renewable energy. I do not believe that nuclear power is a good option for many reasons. I'm not going to get into those tonight. I could give a whole talk on that topic, but I really think renewables really are the way to go. And this means lots and lots of renewable energy, a huge amount of generation. That said, we have a great start. Solar energy in particular is growing at an incredible rate. I'll show you some figures on that in a little bit. But we have a lot more to do. We have a lot of barriers to overcome. We have a lot of opposition to overcome. And what I want to emphasize is to anyone out there, especially a young person starting out who's interested in this topic, this is something you really need to learn about. You really need to learn about and attack the real barriers, not just cheerlead. We have a lot of people out there cheerleading for clean energy, and that's great. That helps build the momentum and get policies done. But there's a lot of barriers there that are hard to see and that really slow things down. And I'll come back to that in a little bit with some examples of that. Politicians will give great lip service, but even in a place where you think you have a progressive state, you think you have great policies, and the politicians seem to be saying the right thing, there are still an amazing number of barriers that really slow everything down, and which, unless you're really versed and really know what you're looking at, you can't even see them. They're behind the scenes kinds of things. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the things for any of you who have taken any kind of basic physics and know what a watt is the unit of power. We measure power intensity in watts per square meter in solar. So this is something called one sun. This is the solar intensity of bright, clear sunlight, 1,000 watts per square meter. And it's remarkably convenient that it just happens to be almost exactly 1,000 watts per square meter. That's just a complete accident, but a really nice thing to remember. If you want to have a mastery of a basic sense of solar energy, this is a good starting point. Just knowing that figure, you can calculate all kinds of great things. And so that's just something to stick in your back pocket and know really well. That's a lot of energy per square meter. That's something I want to emphasize. If that value was 100 watts per square meter, I probably wouldn't be talking to you tonight. But the solar resource is actually very, very powerful. It's enormous. And that figure right there really captures that in one simple number. So you can do various types of calculations. So here's a little little pathway through this thing, and it starts off with a statement here that solar really has staggering potential. If you look at the amount of incident solar energy on the Earth's surface, it's about 120,000 terawatts. A terawatt is a trillion watts. So imagine 120,000 trillion watts of power, of energy, just continuously streaming down to the planet. World energy demand, the total world primary energy demand, is only 24 terawatts, just a tiny minuscule piece of what's coming in solar energy wise. The entire US primary energy demand, that's all of the energy coming from fossil fuels, including the heat that is wasted in the conversion processes, is about 3 terawatts. The end use energy, the energy we actually use to run our machinery, the actual, what actually goes into the light bulbs, goes into the motors, etc., is only about 1 terawatt. And if you do some calculation, I'll show you on the next slide, it turns out that you would need an area well under 1% in terms of collector area, photovoltaic collector area, well under 1% of US land area. So the whole idea that solar would take way, way too much land area, that it's unfeasible, it's a weak energy source, all of that's just a red herring. This is an enormous energy, clean energy source just sitting that we have that we can use. Okay, so here's another long calculation. I don't really want to take you all the way through this, but I just want to show you the power of what knowing one sun can do. So turns out if you know that sunlight gives 1 kilowatt per square meter, 1,000 watts per square meter, and then you take into account daytime and nighttime. So you look at how much insolation, how much energy we actually get per square meter per day on average. It's about 5. And then if you factor in the efficiency of today's photovoltaic technology, about 20%, then you take 20% of 5, well, you're back down to 1 kilowatt here. So an average PV generation will generate 1 kilowatt hour per square meter per day. That's a very simple number to remember. Then if you do some other conversions, divide a terawatt hour by a kilowatt hour, you'll get a factor of 1 billion. That's a just simple little powers of 10 calculation. A day has 24 hours. Then we look at what the end use energy would be in the United States if we have a terawatt. For 24 hours, that's 24 terawatt hours per day. That means that we would need, if you work this out, 24 billion square meters of PV collection to get, using this figure of 1 billion here and using this 1 kilowatt hour per square meter per day. That works out to 24,000 square kilometers. You take the square root of that, that's a square, 155 kilometers on each side, and that's about 96 miles. And that leads us to this famous statement that it would take a square about 100 miles by 100 miles of solar collection area to power the United States. And that's really, really true. That's taking into account the efficiency, that's taking into account clouds, day and night, all of that stuff. That's this little square right there. And now, I don't advocate putting all the solar energy generation in one place like this. We would scatter that all over the place and distribute it out, which is what we're doing. But nonetheless, that's not very much. That's much smaller than the area we use to grow corn just in one state, for example. All right, so I really want to make tonight is that photovoltaics as a technology is not just another source of energy. It is really phenomenal in many fundamental ways that really arguably allow it to transcend above pretty much any other energy source that we have. And those special characteristics of it are really coming to bear, and it is now emerging ahead of the pack of pretty much everything else. And the installation rate of solar now is rocketing. Over 602 gigawatts of solar power, of photovoltaics, was installed worldwide just last year. That's an enormous amount of new generation. 50 of that was in the United States, which is pretty impressive given the obstacles that we face here with the fossil fuel industry. And there is now 236 gigawatts installed in the United States. That is a lot of solar power. That's like 236 giant power plants worth from a capacity standpoint. I've been hearing, since I got into this business in the 90s, I'm always hearing people in the fossil fuel industry say there's no silver bullet for energy. We've got to have all this different stuff. And I actually don't really believe that. Based on the various advantages of photovoltaics, I believe that we do have a silver bullet. And I had ChatGPT work up for me today. I thought I really wanted to make this visual, and I thought it was kind of hilarious the way it came out. But there it is. That's my idea of an energy silver bullet. All right, now, fundamentally, scientifically, what is it about PV that makes it so phenomenal? Basically, photovoltaics is really kind of a quantum mechanical miracle. It really depends on the quantum transport of electrons in crystal structures, which is a really profound area of quantum physics. It involves quantum wave functions called block wave functions that can basically electron wave functions that can move through a regular crystal. And this allows electrons to propagate through crystal structures as if they're almost not even there. It's really an amazing thing. And the crystal structure then also gives us a framework where we can add other elements and we can tailor and build special properties. So this is a very interesting part of photovoltaics. And this is really fundamental to the basic fact that this is a solid state technology. It doesn't require moving parts. The things that move are the quantum waves inside the crystals, and that's a really great thing. This is a little picture of the so-called band structure in a silicon crystal. It's a really complex phenomenon. But to make a long story short, basically you wind up with what's called an energy band gap. It's a gap of forbidden energy levels that electrons can't have. So you have a low energy level and a higher energy level, and that's ultimately what gives rise to the photovoltaic property. Here's a picture of some old style polycrystalline PV where you can actually see the little crystals in the panels. I always like to show this picture to make the point that we're really talking about a crystal structure. So here's a little quick tour of how it works if you're curious. Basically, we have this silicon material, a sheet of it, and we dope it. We put a little bit of phosphorus, say, on the top layer and a little bit of boron on the lower layer. The phosphorus has one more electron than silicon, and so you get this extra electron in the crystal structure that doesn't really have a home. And we also, in the lower layer, we have boron, which has one less electron than silicon in the outermost shell. So we have a little hole, a little dearth. And what happens is when you create this structure, the extra electron there finds its way down and gets lodged in that hole, basically. And that creates a layer of positive charge here and a layer of negative charge. It's kind of built right into the crystal structure. And that gives us an electric field, kind of built into the crystal structure. So then what happens is you have this built-in electric field, and here you have a whole bunch of electrons in the lower energy level. Here's the band gap. Here's the upper level, the conduction band. And you're sitting there, and then a photon of light, a little packet of light comes along and gets absorbed by the panel, and it excites one of these electrons up into the conduction band. So now you have an excited electron. And then the next thing that happens is that electron drops down a little bit in level, loses a little bit of energy, but it sits there at the bottom of the conduction band. So now it's stored that energy, which is really great. Now, normally, if we didn't have this doping, this electron would fall right back into the hole and give off the energy back again, and the panel would just get warm. But what happens is with this special built-in electric field, that built-in electric field now pushes this electron, this excited electron, up to the top and causes other electrons to go into the hole here. And basically, we get something called charged particle separation. The electron gets pushed to the top, the hole gets pushed to the bottom, like that. And then this happens over and over again, and we get a whole gas of electrons here. We get a whole bunch of electrons here. And the thing about these excited electrons is they hate each other, they repel each other, and they form a kind of electron pressure. And then that electron pressure can push electrons through a wire and through a load and deliver energy. So the electrons, if you hook up the load like a motor or a battery or a light bulb, the electrons will get pushed through, they'll deliver their energy to the load, and then they'll come back and they'll annihilate the hole, and the process starts over and over again. So that's a basic idea of how photovoltaics work. All right, so this is a solid state technology, no moving parts, we don't need any gears, just those electron waves. And it's really very nice because we need just very small amounts of material per watt of generation. So it's actually a very materially efficient material, very thin. PV panels are very thin. It's very durable because it's a crystal structure. It'll last many, many decades, even in the bright sunlight, even with getting hot and cold. It has therefore a very long life, very long usable lifetime. It's completely scalable. You can build this, you can power a calculator or a whole city with this. And it's got lots of potential for future improvement in terms of cost reduction, efficiency improvements, longevity improvements. Really fantastic. So here we are. This is PV with the band gap. And then if you start to think about it, well, actually, here we are with PV. PV is a semiconductor, so we're in the middle. But it's also interesting that if you start to think about it, it's these same properties that give us insulators, which we also need for electrical equipment, like the insulation on the outside of a wire, because there you have a material with a very big band gap and the electrons can't get across, and so you have an electronic insulator. And we have wires that can conduct electricity. This is when you don't have a band gap and the conduction band and the valence band are right together and you can have electrons just freely flow. So in fact, even just ordinary pieces of wire that make our electrical system work are also really a quantum mechanical miracle. And so are the insulators. And here we have it. This is all the science we need for a complete clean energy system. So we have the solid state operation. That's a strong point. Over the decades, the efficiency has risen. The efficiency today of the panels you can buy for your house, say, are about 20%. We even have higher efficiency for things like satellites. we have now very mature electronics that can convert the DC solar electricity into AC so we can run our appliances. That's a process called inversion or conversion, so inverters. We have mounting technologies for every kind of roof. I'll show you a few of those. We have well-developed electrical codes and standards. This is nothing to be underestimated. It took a long, long time to get our electrical codes and safety standards and UL standards and everything like that really up to snuff to make this so we can deploy it at scale without problems. We have great educational services in the industry. We have great certification organizations for making sure things are good quality. We have great simulation software so we can design and predict the behavior of these systems. So these are all very, very special things about PV. You should know, there are many different kinds of photovoltaic materials, not just the kind I've described with silicon. This is a graph from the National Renewable Energy Lab showing how, for various research test cells, how the efficiency has been increasing for many of these over the decades. We are now looking at some pretty high levels. The cells you would buy for your home are actually down around here in efficiency, but you can see there's some stuff that the exotic stuff that goes way up high. But efficiency isn't the end all. What really matters is the longevity and the cost per unit energy produced. And so we don't necessarily have to get super high efficiencies, but what this graph shows is that there's potential for getting even much higher efficiencies that would make things even look much more attractive than they already are. And you may read in the news now something called perovskites. This is the latest new material, potentially very high efficiency, up in the 30s. I think there was a test cell the other day about 34. This material hasn't been proven to be able to have the longevity yet, but it's getting closer, and there's a lot of excitement about it and a lot of expectation that it's going to get there. So that could nearly double our efficiency in the next decade here. There's different ways of mounting this on rooftops. This shows a couple. I want to get into this a little bit because if we're actually going to deploy this stuff, we actually need to be able to support it and have it really work in our infrastructure well. This is something called a ballast mount. This wasn't around or well developed about 20 years ago, but now it's really well developed. This is basically these little plastic buckets with little cement pavers in them, and they can just sit on a roof. We don't have to penetrate the roof. So if you have a flat roof with like a rubber roof, like an EPDM roof or TPO or something like that, we can put these right on the roof. We don't have to make holes in the roof, and the panels just basically get snapped onto little brackets on these and get held down, and we wire them up, and we can build this very quickly. There's even little robots now that can go around and lay these out and actually put the panels on them. Kind of cute, like little Wall-E robots. Then there's tilt-up racking. Tilt-up racking can be really great because you can get a steeper angle, better orientation. And this stuff clamps right onto the standing seams, really good. And then there's also flush mounts. This is when you have a tilted roof and you want to put the panels just parallel to the roof surface. So these are some of the different basic types of mounting systems. Here's one of my company's instruments in a place called Garrett Leather. It uses the ballast here. You can see it on this rubber roof. Very, very slick. Here's another kind of mounting system that uses what we call east-west. This is sometimes when you have if this is the south direction, and sometimes it isn't very convenient to tilt the panels south, sometimes you can use this kind of arrangement, and it can produce quite efficiently and can be an elegant solution. This shows one of the standing seam brackets, one of the so-called S5 brackets. It just clamps right onto the standing seam. Very simple, no penetration here through here. Here's a side view looking underneath here. You can see the S5 brackets, and then these brackets that stick up here and give us this tilt. Here's some of the wiring underneath. Here's the ground, the equipment ground here, and the PV string cable here, and the conduits. This is a Proterra bracket that you can fasten onto a corrugated roof. Here you do have a penetration, but you have some special sealant here to keep the roof from leaking. Costs a little bit more to install, but still can work. And then we have what's called the balance of system. Besides the panels, we've got the inverters, we've got disconnects here, switches basically, conduits, all that good stuff that we have to put on the we have to install with the system to get the whole system to work. So what happens is the DC PV power comes down here off the roof, and it goes into the inverter, and it gets converted into AC, and then that gets pushed back out and connects right onto the grid connection for the building, so that the building can use the solar power, or the excess solar power can be pushed back out onto the web if there's more solar power than the building needs. That's basically all there is to it. This is a ground mount here, and this is showing what's called a wire tray. We have nicely developed and usable wire trays like this that lower the cost of installation and make things a lot more accessible if maintenance is needed. This is me here with one of our battery systems. We're now installing lithium-ion battery systems. This is a system that can basically prevent the building from drawing too much from the grid, so that reduces what's called demand charges, and it can store up solar energy for use at night, and it can also provide backup power to the building if the grid goes down. These are made by a company called Solarc, which is out of Texas. I mentioned codes and standards. The 2023 NEC is kind of a big deal for us. This is the first time that all the PV definitions are now in Chapter 1. PV's kind of become official. It's really nice, and the codes in the 2023 are super well developed now, and also do a really great job with energy storage. So that this whole paradigm has really come of age. And there are great books out there if you want to delve into all the nitty-gritty details of the NEC. There are books like this by Sean White and Bill Brooks. Sean White's an educator, and Bill Brooks is one of the guys that actually gets all this into the code. So you can learn this stuff. It's a learning to read the National Electric Code is a challenging task, but if you're a nerd like me, you love it. We also have some new stuff. So one of the things that we have in the systems these days are what are called rapid shutdown devices, which cause the system to disconnect from itself, from every panel to disconnect from every other panel if a firefighter turns off the disconnect. But now we also have some new technologies where if we use the right kind of system and we build it in the right way, we don't even have to use those anymore. This is something called a photovoltaic hazard control system, and that's just come into play in the last couple of years, and now we're starting to see these around the United States, and these make it even cheaper and easier to install. We have great design software. This is a design I did a couple of years ago for a complicated building, but what you can see is we can easily take into account all the structures on the roof, the HVAC systems, the little buildings, the gas pipes, all that stuff, and we can really nestle in a system onto a very complicated roof that can still offset a great deal of the building's power usage. So crazy as it seems, we can actually put PV on buildings like that. What's really driving the big boom in solar has how the cost has come down. It's come down from 1975 down to an incredibly low cost. The cost of the solar panels now, or what we call modules, is now a minority fraction of the cost of the system, only about 20% of the system. This insulates us against price increases from tariffs, and the cost is even coming down further with time. So solar has become very cost effective, and a lot of people are installing it just to save money. And as the cost has come down, the rate of installation has skyrocketed. This was 2024, 602 gigawatts of installation, most of it in China. China is now the world leader by far in installing this stuff, also in manufacturing it. But here's the US, we're not doing too bad, and Europe, I'd like to see these a lot bigger, but this is an extraordinary amount of solar getting installed. The National Renewable Energy Lab forecasts a very, very strong future for solar. This is what they forecast in the sort of mid case. This is with no new dramatic policy changes coming in. They predict that solar will take up a very, very large part of the load in capacity or generation over the next couple decades, displacing a lot of fossil fuels. also along with wind power. With that's happening in the current administration, offshore wind is getting a little bit of a squeeze, but we'll see. I think it will probably bounce back too, and we'll probably have a strong combination of both. You can get this report. This is with the 2022 Standard Scenarios report from NREL. It's a great resource for gauging really what the best projections are on the industry. All right, so a solar energy future, is this really possible? There really are no fundamental technical barriers to doing this. The intermittency is not a fundamental problem. The land area is not a problem. The cost is not a problem. But we do have very practical barriers. There's a lot of undue political influence from the fossil fuel industry. They still exercise a very strong lobby. We have utility monopolies. This is actually in many ways a bigger problem. Very entrenched utilities. Utilities are often have a very short-term profit. Many of them are investor-owned. They have a very short-term profit motive. They have very long-term investments, and they don't really instinctively don't like a lot of people coming in and generating their own power and taking away their monopoly effectively. There's a lot of long-term investments in the fossil fuel infrastructure, and this includes just even small municipalities and things like that that have invested in various ways, or rural electric co-ops often are heavily invested in conventional power plants. There's a lot of lack of public awareness, even with all the solar development. People they don't know that much, and in some ways, I think people are less inclined to learn these days because many people, I think, feel that, oh, it's going pretty well. I don't have to look at it so much. There's also a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of it very actively spread out or spread. There's a lot of limited public agency in energy decision making. In other words, people are very the general public is very separated from the processes that govern energy decision making. Most of the energy decision making takes place at public utility commissions and legislatures, and not really something that people can choose themselves unless they install a solar system, for example. There's also, and I think this is relevant to this audience especially, there's a gap between the liberal arts and the trades. We have a tradition where people going into the trades often don't get a lot of environmental education, philosophical education, and people in the liberal arts who do don't get a lot of technical education that would empower them to really work effectively on energy. So there's a gap between these two. There's a lot of professors out there writing papers on clean energy that really don't know that much about clean energy technology. There's a lot of people in the trades that don't know much about why the technology is really important or really how to advance it. So this is a place where I think we can do a lot of bridging between the two. And we have rocketing energy demand, data centers, heat pumps, electric vehicles. These things are skyrocketing the demand for electricity, and that's putting a lot of impetus on keeping fossil fuels going, and maybe also nuclear, and then just creating a difficult path for us to actually reduce emissions. Even if we add a lot of solar, reducing emissions is going to be tough if we double the electricity demand. We don't have enough of the renewables. All right, so on the topic of the difficulties that we face in the industry. So in the industry, we like to refer to the solar coaster. It is a widely used term, and basically it reflects the environment that the industry really has to face. The utility companies that we have to work with are enormous entities. They have a captive customer base. They enjoy regulated monopolies. They have a huge revenue stream. They're here forever. They have armies of lawyers and lobbyists. The solar companies tend to be much smaller outfits, and we exist in an unsteady kind of boom-bust environment. Very hard, and it's a real question. Does it really make sense to try to transform the energy structure this way? To have all these little companies trying to do this? Arguably, maybe no. Maybe they're doing a better job in China, where they just say, "Hey, utility companies, you're doing this, do it." But here we don't quite have that system. On the other hand, there is an argument that small companies are better at being innovative and being flexible and agile. And there's a lot of evidence for that in the progress we've made in the United States. But in any case, that's the situation we find ourselves in is this solar coaster. We have the barriers we face here are all of that utility and fossil fuel interest that's often lobbying against us. Utility scale renewables. So this slide is dedicated to what I call distributed solar. This is the stuff on rooftops or relatively small systems on the ground. The stuff that's put in close to load. I'm a very, very big believer in the value of distributed solar, but it often doesn't get enough recognition for its benefits. And utility scale renewables can actually sometimes be a barrier to distributed because of competition and because of using up the available capacity on the grid. I'm very supportive of utility scale renewables, by the way. This is not to bash them. We need a lot of them as well as distributed, but there can be tensions between these. There's a lot of just straight out political opposition to clean energy. We have insufficient incentives. Many states don't have very strong incentives. Many states that do have incentives incentives aren't strong enough. These incentives are constantly changing. That makes our lives very, very difficult. Many of the incentives are very complex, many pages of forms to fill out and long approval processes. We have very non-uniform incentives. For example, down in the corner here, I just show a part from New York State here. There's an incentive called a REAP incentive, which we now really is hard to get anymore under the current administration, but it was only available in the rural areas, not in the urban areas, for example. So very non-uniform. We have very uninformed public, and this is made worse by the fact that many of the incentives are very complex. So you have a high learning curve, and then at the same time, not very many people that are well informed. So difficult upward battle for us that way. We have an outdated, congested power grid. There's a lot of places we can't interconnect onto the grid, and that leads to what is called a lack of hosting capacity. Hosting is the ability of the grid to host or to interconnect with the renewables. We have high development costs. There's a lot of things that can be very expensive for distributed solar. If you need a new roof, or if you have to do an expensive environmental study, or whatever it might be that you have to do, just add cost. With distributed solar, we have smaller economies of scale, and then we have complicated electrical code rules. I love the electrical code. We really need it, but it is complex, and that for small projects, that adds an extra burden to just something we have to deal with. And then every single site we do is a custom design when you're talking about distributed. So these are all the things that we face, and there's a lot here that people can do to help improve in working as advocates, working as just general people in the public, people that might buy these systems, and people working in the industry. Here are some other barriers we have. Our storage technology is evolving very rapidly. We have problems with it sometimes, serious problems. It's just not there all the way sometimes. We don't have sufficient documentation on these products. We often have sales reps who don't know their product well. There's a lot of unknowns in these new products. We have a lot of problems with where to site equipment. Buildings, there's often not a place to put the inverters and the switches, for example. We have like conduits may be installed in a building, but there's no space in them. We might have not enough space in the electric panels. This shows an electric panel where we're interconnected here. You can see these connectors. But many cases, we don't have a lot of space like this, so it's very expensive to try to interconnect. We have a lot of distances between the array and the point of interconnection. People will say, oh, I'd love a solar array. I just want it 500 feet from my garage. And when we price it out, it's too expensive to run at 500 feet. Kills the deal. And then if we do run at 500 feet, then we have the cost of the trenching, and we might have to remove foliage or prepare the site. We might have difficult ground conditions to deal with. Carports. Carports are wonderful solar structures. They provide shade and they can use a parking lot, but they cost a lot to put up. Often the switchgear at a building is very outdated. And if we touch it, then it might trigger an update, and the customer might not be able to afford that, so we're not able to interconnect. We may have trouble just getting the data from the system up to the internet, all kinds of data transmission obstacles. Some of these are technical with the equipment, some of these are locational, some of these are cost. We have compatibility issues with data transfer. There's all sorts of different data transfer things out there that often don't work together. And then just the cost of the monitoring services here. Everyone seems to want to make money in places sometimes where they shouldn't be. And as you'd be surprised, just to get internet service somewhere might take away a good fraction of your savings. This shows some of the space constraints. Like this is a place where we installed those battery systems. This was the existing electrical service here. There's no room here to put the inverters. We did end up, we had to put them out from the building on their own cement pads, which ended up adding a lot of cost. Here's a case where we managed to get a system installed on the wall, but you can see it's very tight. Hosting capacity, where we can interconnect on the grid. This is in New York State. The parts here that have lines, this is in National Grid Service territory. All of those red places, all of those red lines are places where we can't interconnect, where the grid can't take the solar. All the blue parts and yellow parts are where we can. So you can see there's a lot of places we can't interconnect. So that really limits the ability. Now what's happening over time is the utility is gradually fixing that. Feeder by feeder, they're upgrading the substations and upgrading the lines here and there. So more and more capacity is becoming available, but it's a slow process. And oftentimes the utilities will hit us with very, very high upgrade charges, sometimes outrageously high. And we often don't have any transparency into whether the costs are actually legitimate or if they're just trying to slow us down. Okay. We also, incentives are constantly changing, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Some of the Northeast states have been introducing new policies, which are pretty good. But even just the fact that they change can be difficult, and then they sometimes make them very complicated for us. And then other states in California, California has really damaged themselves by really pulling back on net metering, I think because of the undue influence of the utility industry. So that's a challenge. All right, so what can you do? This is something where the first thing I always tell people is educate yourself really well, study up, engage with the industry, engage with sources of information, talk to people. Really work to overcome that gap between the liberal arts and the trades. Really learn what's going on technically with the technology, what's going on scientifically. Really get into the policy issues. When you start talking about policy, most people's eyes glaze over. You know, I can put people to sleep. I could use it as anesthesia in a dentist's office probably by talking about policy. It's intrinsically boring to most people, but it is so crucially important. The nitty-gritty of what's going on in the policy is so crucially important. And I'll show you a little bit how to learn about that in just a minute. And then once you kind of know your stuff, you're not going to know everything yet. In fact, you're only going to have scratched the surface. But once you know something, once you know enough to be dangerous, then get involved. For example, as an advocate, get involved with policy. It's not that hard. You can do quite a bit, even just from a computer and keeping track of what's going on and contacting people, giving talks, things like that. Best case is to really fully engage. Showing up at the legislature for one clean energy day and going to a protest or a demonstration, that might help a little bit, but that's not really what it takes. What it really takes is seeing all of those bills through the process and really fighting for all of that nitty-gritty stuff. And then maybe really being a part of the industry, maybe consider a career in the industry or directly facilitating the industry. You can facilitate it in all kinds of ways. If you work at a company, really trying to make that solar project happen, make noise about it, push for it, learn enough to be dangerous, and then make your case. See what you can happen. See if you can get projects happening. And the more you do, the more you get involved, the more you'll learn, and the more success you will have. And you will have a hard time. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of stuff to overcome. But it's also very gratifying when you succeed. Here are some great resources. This is my guide. So there's the American Solar Energy Society, ASIS.org. We're a great general society to be a part of. It'll kind of plug you into a larger network right away. There's also another related organization, a lot of overlap between these, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, great group. And then there are the solar industries associations. I make a sharp distinction between the nonprofits that are of this type, the advocacy type, that are kind of pure, they don't have a financial self-interest, and the industries associations. The industries associations, however, are fantastic, and they are crucial for learning what's going on with policy. They will tell you what's going on with the policy. You don't have to go learn it all yourself. You can go to their websites and find out what's happening, get onto their networks, get involved with them, go to the legislature with them. The United States has the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, very powerful, very large, very effective, very good information. Most states have a Solar Industries Association or a Renewable Energy Industries Association of some kind. New York State has NYSEA. My company is a member of NYSEA. I've been working directly with them in Albany, and they have a lot of great stuff on their website and on their newsletters and whatnot. If you want to learn about the policies in the United States, you can go to the database of state incentives for renewable energy, USA.org. This is a fantastic website that has complete up-to-date information on the different incentives. And when you go there, you will find yourself in an ocean of incentives. And you will find out what I mean pretty quickly about a lot of the incentives being very complicated and whatnot. But if you spend enough time with it, come back to it over and over again and pick out the things you need to know, you'll eventually get to know what you need to know. You don't need to know everything. In fact, in many cases, you only need to know one thing and to focus on it and work on it. There are also many, many, many other organizations and sides to this. In New York State, we have something called NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. They offer state incentives for installations, and there's a lot of good stuff on their website. And you can also connect with installers there and find companies. It's the best listing of companies. They also do a lot of quality assurance for installations. When we do a system and we get a NYSERDA incentive for it, our system is likely to be subjected to a 200-point inspection regimen that really helps guarantee that the system is installed properly. And that's great. That's great for the industry and great for society. There's the National Renewable Energy Lab, a really great academic resource, scientific resource. I hope they will remain that over the next 4 years. We'll see, but a lot of good stuff out there that you could get. And that's my talk, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Ben, and we will open it up for questions. Here, give myself a little more light. Questions? There we go. Karen, go ahead.
I am just in shock over the information that you provided at the beginning about the amount of solar energy that could be collected.
Yeah.
And because I have been staying up at night worrying about these data centers and the amount of energy they're going to use. It sounds,
yeah.
And what I want to do is verify what I think you've said, which is that there's more than enough solar energy for all these data centers, and they can be powered by renewables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely right in terms of the resource. The resource is certainly there. That's not a problem. What is a problem is how fast those energy use, how fast that energy use is growing relative to, because we're just trying to displace the existing fossil fuels now. Even if energy use stayed level, that would still be a very challenging thing to do. And we're out of time. We're already out of time, and so this has just raised the stakes even higher.
Well, I guess the other half of my question is, in Colorado, or at least here in Boulder, Colorado, we have required grow labs, marijuana grow labs, to generate their own electricity. is it reasonable to say to data centers, you have to create your own renewable energy?
This is yes. So trying to require end users to use clean electricity in any way you can is a good idea. And because of their nature, you may have a better chance at doing that with such data centers. There may be some states that effectively require some of that, for all I know. And there are many companies that we run into them all the time, commercial industries that feel they really need to green up. And in the tech industry, we've seen a lot of that in the past. Google and companies like that, a lot of them have invested heavily in renewables. And I think there are probably data centers being developed where they're being developed in conjunction with a lot of renewables. So absolutely. But as to whether there's enough of that, especially now that I think environmental regulation is going to be weakening under the current administration significantly, and that the kind of AI race is on full scale, I think it's going to make that is going to aggravate that issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
And Rob's got a hand up. Go ahead, Rob.
Ben, we have a lot of undergraduates in the audience, some of whom are about to graduate. Most of them are not engineers or physicists, and so they will not go into the solar industry to do those things. But many of them are very talented in doing all kinds of things. There are people in business and arts and every other kind of thing. There's a question I know you can't answer directly, but as the solar industry grows, it's obviously going to need lots of different kinds of people of different sorts of skills, some of whom are more generally trained and don't necessarily have an engineering background. Imagine there's a student in the audience today who thinks, that sounds like a cool career, but I'm not sure if I have any qualifications to do that. Could you mention 2 or 3 or however many kinds of work you think that students might be able to move toward, even if they are not themselves solar energy engineers?
Absolutely, Rob. So within the industry, there are all sorts of jobs. For instance, on the financial side, how you structure deals, how you work with companies that are trying to green up. There are people that work as kind of sustainability coordinators. That is a very multidisciplinary skill. They need to have technical background, but they need to have good communication skills. They need to have good data skills. People who do data analysis, there's a lot of potential jobs in the industry for that. There's a lot of software type of stuff that can be done. Just actually doing front end sales. There's a lot of very smart people doing that, and it can be a very lucrative career. And it's something that a lot of people with a good liberal arts background could get into. But then outside of that, on the advocacy side, legal side, and if you're working within all these institutions, for instance, universities, there are a lot of university professors who are very pro-green and even maybe doing clean energy research and things like that. But their university is consuming tons of fossil fuels and their cars that go back and forth. So trying to green up these institutions and bring all that together, you could be working any job in those institutions and you could still be putting part of your time to making that change happen there. But you're going to be much more effective at it if you know your stuff. So if you don't have to be an electrician to learn about how these systems work and kind of what goes into them and what the barriers are and things like that. You can simply educate yourself. And the more you know, too, the more you're going to be able to see how you might be able to fit in. And you may be able to fit into ways that you would have never imagined unless you had dug in.
All right.
Go ahead, Rob.
No, I just said thank you. That was a good answer. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, and I have a question that's kind of a cousin of that, so I thought I'd get myself in the queue. I am down in Maryland today because I was at a environmental fair for a couple of hundred students from Prince George's County Public Schools here, which is one of the larger districts in the country. They have 135,000 students and 28 high schools. And I talked for a little bit with the director of career and technical education here, who has been frustrated in particularly with the urban students, which is most of the population of the district, getting them excited about uh, green careers. And I'm wondering if you've got any insights on her term was how to make it sexy for for urban kids who are maybe not thinking very much about climate change and things like that.
Yeah, I think that exposing people to the actual technology, getting the solar system stuff, the actual panels, getting this kind of stuff into the classroom, getting your hands on it, talking about the profound aspects of the science, doing the history of it. The history of this stuff is fascinating and might help spur some ideas. And money and careers are potentially attractive, and maybe bringing in young professionals who are already having a good time in the industry, and are dynamic, bringing them in to directly connect. We often tend, our whole educational system is very insulated from what goes on in society. We bring all these young people together in a classroom with a teacher. The teacher's involved with just the school and the students, and the students are just involved with each other, and all this stuff is going on there outside in the real world. And unless you get a field trip out there or you bring the speakers in, you don't get that connection. And of course, many teachers do that. They have field trips and they do bring in people, but specifically on clean energy, that may be something that's lacking because it's considered, well, energy, the trades, that's not really what we do here. That's not where these kids are going. So we're not gonna bring those kinds of people in.
Yeah, and I'll note it was a great event today, and many of the presenters were Prince George's County alumni, working in environmental fields and talking about that. And I, on the field trip thing, I learned from one of the teachers that if they had wanted to extend the bus run so that people could have stayed later, it'd be $2,000 per bus, because they just don't have enough bus drivers, and so that was not really an option for them, which is interesting.
I think in that case, using people that can come in and who are willing to volunteer their time. And so, for instance, that's what I'm doing. I make myself available for that, and I'm happy to go spend a certain fraction of my time just visiting classrooms if people want me to. And I think there's a lot of people in the industry that are very happy to do that.
Good. Other questions?
So I see one from Charles Hastings here. And there's one up above. Okay, yeah. So Charles asks, has the weight of solar panels on the roof come down enough that it's less of a problem for roofs without massive support? Also, what about regions with heavy snow cover several months a year? How do people stay clear of snow? I love these questions. So being in Buffalo, New York, this is very important to us. So first of all, the weight of the systems, like the ballasted systems, those are the heaviest ones that use the little blocks. It turns out the average weight of those averages out to about 8 pounds per square foot. Most of the roofs and commercial roofs that we work with are rated to take much higher snow load weights than that. So usually by adding the ballasted systems, we're just adding a little bit more to the weight of the roof that for commercial systems usually isn't a problem. Nonetheless, we always have to check carefully. We do sometimes run into roofs where it's questionable that adding the solar it might not be advisable. And so we may have to have the roof reinforced. Extra purlins or rafters may have to be added, or other structural supports in some cases. Doesn't happen very often, but once in a while. And typically with a roof like that where there's a problem, they may be facing a problem anyways, where they may need to do that just to prevent a possible snow-driven collapse at some point. With snow cover, snow is interesting. So one of the things we focus on in like a lot of the designs that I do, I really try to get the panels tilted as much as I can. So many times we'll use tilt up racking where we can get at least 15 inches, or sorry, 15 degrees, which helps a lot with the snow shedding. I'd like to go even steeper than that, although that's often not feasible. On ground mounts, we'll tilt more like 20, 25 degrees. Those shed snow fairly well. Nonetheless, we do lose a lot of generation in the Northeast due to snow from the months of basically December through the end of February. We lose quite a bit, and we significantly derate our systems so that they typically, we predict that they lose about 15% of their total possible generation due to snow, typically. In the future, I would like to see that improved. I think we could see some technology where that could keep ground mounts cleared of snow. And also ground mounts can also use what's called one-axis tracking, where instead of having the panels facing south like this, what we have them is we have them running the long way north-south, and they can tilt like this, and they follow the sun, and those panels can tilt very steeply one way or the other and help shed the snow off, and those can produce quite a bit more during the winter time to get away from snow.
Other questions? I've got another. So how did you end up interested in doing this? How did you go from being a kid in Western New York to being a solar scientist?
So my path was kind of interesting. When I was a teenager, I wanted to know what consciousness is, as a phenomena, as a physical, what are we as mental beings? And that led me to get interested. Somebody gave me a copy of a book called Metamagical Themas by Douglas Hofstadter and Gödel Escher Bach, that great philosophical book about a discovery in mathematics and the music of Bach and how that might lead to explanations of consciousness. So I ate that stuff up. And then in Metamagical Themas, I read it. There was a chapter in there on chaos theory. This was the emerging science of nonlinear dynamics, basically the study of nonlinear differential equations. And it had been discovered in the 60s and 70s, 80s, that nonlinear systems can give rise to very, very sort of infinitely complex behavior that people call chaos. And I thought, well, maybe that suggests maybe our brains are somehow accessing that kind of mathematical reality through physical laws that gives rise. So I delved into that. I became a physicist in that area. My PhD was in the nonlinear dynamics area. So I had all that background. And then I went to Los Alamos. So I was doing chaos theory research, basically applied to many different physical phenomena at Los Alamos. And they have a climate institute there, or geophysics institute there. And I saw presentations in the early 90s on climate science. I saw the simulations of the global climate circulation models, the big GCMs. And I saw the predictions of where the temperature was going to go and where the CO2 was going to go. And I said to myself, oh, crap. We are perturbing this giant chaotic physical system called the atmosphere, the weather system, with a strong perturbation. And I knew from my nonlinear dynamics background that if you even small changes to parameters can sometimes dramatically change the behavior and shift you into new kinds of regimes. And the basic ideas about climate feedback loops made total sense to me. So, you start to melt the Arctic ice, and then all of a sudden the ocean can absorb a lot more solar energy, and it gets even warmer, and you get even more melting. And then you melt the permafrost, and that even puts more CO2 into the air, and that heats everything up, and you get more forest fires, and then you get even more CO2 and more. So I got really spooked that the climate was really going to go haywire on us and really damage life on the planet. So I agonized over that about 6 months. And then around 1994, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to fix this. So I started looking around at energy sources. I did those basic calculations in solar energy. I looked at many different technologies. And I asked myself, sitting on this enormous clean energy resource, why aren't we using this? It seems like a no-brainer to me. So I started going out on installations and learned solar tech, and got involved with the local Solar Energy Association. And kind of the rest was history. And I've watched it develop ever since. And I could see, even back then, we had enough data to show that as solar production, as solar manufacturing ramped up, the cost would come down. And we could look at what's called a learning curve. And it was very clear that every time the industry doubled, the cost would tend to come down about 20%. And that's how I did some basic calculations. Thought, okay, if we keep that growing, how much is the cost going to come down? And I predicted around 2015, we actually should get to the point where it should be the same as regular grid power in terms of cost, and it's called the grid parity point. And that's what happened. The industry kept going, in part because all these people started advocating for it and getting these policies passed, getting the renewable energy standards passed and things like that. And the cost came down, and in 2015, it got to the grid parity point, and boom, the industry took off, and China invested super heavily too, and drove the cost down even a lot more. And that's why we're now seeing hundreds of gigawatts installed every year. And finally, it finally has come of age. So that's my whole journey in a nutshell.
Very good, very good. Any other questions? I'll note I got one as a direct message asking where to find the recording, and because we're live streaming on YouTube, we already have the link for the recording, so you can find it right there if you want to rewatch this tomorrow.
I just brought it up myself.
Yes, and in a few days, I won't get to it tomorrow recording, and because we're live streaming on YouTube, there it is. We already have the link for the recording, so you find it right there. Is that you doing that?
Sorry, no, that was me. I activated the link, and then you were talking over yourself.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I what was I saying? And so in a few days, sometime next week, I'll have it linked from the Science in the Virtual Pub events page.
Well,
any other questions?
Well, thank you very much, Don, and Rob, and everybody at PRI. It's fantastic, and I am. You can reach me if you send email to Dawn and put me in touch with. We put in touch, and I'm happy to do follow-up discussions, and especially young people out there who want to talk about career stuff. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you what I know and see if I can help you on your way.
Thanks so much. Thank you all, and have a great night. And I think we will call it a night.
Thank you, Ben.